Hello everyone, I'm Mike Hardman and welcome to the Stoughton Writers Group. I'm the author of Hartman, a Memoir, and today I have Keith Crochiere, right, he wrote an excellent book about Roseland Ballroom, Pavilion 100 Years. Keith, when you wrote your book and I told people about this, everyone went crazy about it. I have a friend that's convinced his family moved from High Park to Stoughton Easton because they want to be closer to Roseland Ballroom.
I don't doubt that.
You know, really, it was an amazing place. Tell a little bit about it so people didn't know about it.
So Roseland Ballroom opened in 1924, May 28th, 1924, and it was a state-of-the-art facility. It had scented air. The bathrooms, especially ladies' rooms, were very luxurious. And from 1924 to 1947, when it burned down, they were one of the top 20 venues in the United States for music. The biggest and the best performers in the country and the world came there. They had parking for the 2,000 machines because, remember, in 1924, cars were pretty much a novelty. Mm-hmm. And so I just got intrigued with it and began doing some research.
You performed at Roseland, right?
No,
because I thought you played the drums there?
I do play the drums.
Okay.
I play the drums. I've been in the big band.
Yeah.
I was in the big band for 20 years. I still play in a couple of different big bands and marching bands, but I never got to perform there. I tried to get my band in there in the 2000 teens, but they still dance at Roseland every second and fourth Sunday, mm-hmm. and they have two bands that rotate, so they're very precise. The dancers who come, and any given Sunday when they're dancing, there'll be 100 to 200 people there, mm-hmm. and the bands that perform have to be very knowledgeable about tempo and the music that they're playing, because these are ballroom dancers and they're fastidious, they're magnificent to watch. My wife's a good dancer. I can't dance a lick. I'm a good drummer, but I don't dance.
Two left feet.
Yeah.
Yeah, I have the same syndrome too. Can you imagine what it was like on May 28th when it opened up in Taunton? I mean, Taunton's halfway from Boston to Providence, basically. In the middle, it was a different Taunton. It was a city, but it was growing. You know, it just grew. This made it grow, and all the stuff that happened from there. But can you imagine what that night must have been like?
I've imagined it many times, and the newspaper story about Roseland on the 29th is very well done and gives you a good feel and flavor for what really happened that night. And it's odd because it's one of the only two after-event review kind of newspaper stories that I found in my research of 100 years. That there was a story after the opening of Roseland, the grand opening, May 28th, and then there was another story in November the following year when they had a week-long Armistice Day celebration. Again, this was World War I ended in 1918. And so the Armistice celebration was a big deal. It was reported in the Boston Globe. They had recreations of aerial battles. I mean, they had everything going on at Roseland. They had artificial snow. They could make artificial snow inside, autumn leaves falling. It was very, very sophisticated. And to imagine that 1924 was the height of Prohibition. That means you couldn't sell liquor legally. Prohibition was a very odd law. You could have it, you just couldn't transport it or sell it. Mm-hmm. When I did my book, I stayed factual. So any of the rumors about bootleggers and gangsters and all of that stuff isn't anywhere in the book. But I'm a realist and a musician. So I know that there was alcohol and there was all kinds of illegal substances. There were the biggest musicians in the country playing and performing there, and the audience was having a really good time. One of the things that surprised me is that they would often do a dance on well, it wasn't Sunday, it was Monday. It would be 12:05. So they would start the performance at 12:05 in the morning, and they would go until 4 in the morning.
Wow.
And they did this a lot.
Yeah. It was amazing with the fireworks too. Things that were state of the art at the time that they did. It's just, I wish, when I read your book, I wanted to go there. And I wanted to be part of that. You took me there and reading the stories, I wanted to see what that was like. It must have been amazing because it was Taunton. I mean, it wasn't a big city, and it was a really great place that people went to.
It really was. And again, as you mentioned earlier, it was halfway between Boston and Providence. And at that time, in between Boston and Taunton, Providence and Taunton, was cowfields. I mean, it wasn't much.
Right.
And so it was a big, Taunton is a small city, but it is a city. Had a very diverse ethnic population at the time, a big Polish contingent, Irish contingent, a fair amount of ethnic Jewish people, Italians, a lot of English and Irish, of course. But it was fascinating. The 1930s have always had a real pull for me, and this was interesting.
I find like you had the book about much about the Depression, and they kind of survived the Depression.
They really did. I mean, what I tried to do is, what I did in the book is, from 1924 to 47, I've chronicled all the performers that were there at Roseland, and they were there like 3 or 4 times a week. It tailed off a little bit during the Depression, and I did my research based on the Taunton Daily Gazette, primarily, 95%. And while I was expecting coverage of Hoovervilles and bread lines, and it wasn't like that. There was mentions of, poverty balls to raise money for those in need and going out of business sales, but it wasn't the Dust Bowl images that I had in my mind about the Depression. And the same is true of the hurricane of 38 and the Wall Street crash in 29. It was a blip in the newspaper, and kind of mentioned a little bit the one event that got all the press that I thought it was going to get was World War II. I mean, that was from like 1936 forward. It was in the paper almost daily, and when we got into a declaration of war after Pearl Harbor, it was front page all the time.
That's what I found interesting in your book. I first read it for the musicians, and then I went back and read it for the history part. It's like twofold book. It's like the history of Taunton area, this area too. Because
I tried to pick that up.
Yeah.
And in fact, I gave some references to where I grew up in Chicopee, where the automobile was invented in the United States, and I tried to reflect the things that were going on each year in Taunton and the country, but more Taunton I was focused on.
What made you do the book?
It was I got to say it was an inspiration, or I read a posting on Facebook in 1921 about Aerosmith performing at Roseland in February 1974. Of course, I love Aerosmith. And so I decided to go to the library to read a book about Roseland. And I found out that there were no books about Roseland. And they had a small file in the rare book room, which is very interesting. And I read the file. They had copies of the original 1924 opening and then the fire in 47. I then went to the Old Colony History Museum. They had a little bit more, but not much. And it just intrigued me. And I decided to start the research. And I looked at the Taunton Daily Gazette every day of every week from 1923 to 1947. And then Roseland reopened in 1950 amidst no fanfare whatsoever, no review, something's going on with Roseland and the Taunton Gazette. I don't know what it was, but something's going on. And then I researched from 1950 to 1990 during the period that Rose Simone continued to be the owner-manager. Rose and her eventual husband Mike, J.J. Nichols, the original builder and visionary. I try to give them credit. I didn't research them deeply, but these are fascinating individuals that were running Roseland. I haven't really found anybody related to Roseland that wasn't really interesting, including the present owner, Fei Pan, Philip, who's a Chinese immigrant, been here since the 90s, and really is credited with saving the building and working very hard to reinstitute the entertainment aspect.
The fire was December 26, 1947. You described that in the book, and that was devastating.
Burned to the ground.
Yes.
Burned to the ground. It was a blizzard. I think, I'm trying to remember, the O'Leary's Irish Minstrels maybe were scheduled that night, but they got canceled because of the blizzard. The bowling alley was open. The story in the paper was that there was a bird's nest. Now, Roseland didn't have bowling until 1942. Up until, so for the first 20 years, it was a dance hall. And when the war came and Camp Miles Standish opened in the industrial park 2 or 3 miles away, they put the bowling alleys in downstairs, and it was, I think, 10-pin and candlepin. So that night, bowling was open. There wasn't much of a crowd. They put up a neon sign that said bowling and Roseland. And reportedly, there was a bird's nest behind one of the neon lights that shorted out the light and made a fire that started in the attic. Nobody was killed. The fire chief and a couple of firemen were badly injured. The reporting said that a hose burst while they were trying to put out the fire in the attic. Then the firefighters, 3, got trapped up there. They were freed by other firefighters, and when they fell, they got very hurt. But if they hadn't been trapped and if the hose hadn't broke, they might have been able to get it put out, but they didn't.
That's amazing. A lot of fires around that time, though, because there were wooden structures, and
Wooden
firefighting
buildings.
have come a long way. Roseland means a lot to a lot of people. You know, I mean, to my parents, it meant going dancing and drinking and having fun. To me, it meant going there. Fernandes Supermarket used to have their Christmas party there when I was a little kid. So that was going and getting a present or going to see wrestling. I got judo chopped by Toru Tanaka when I was 11 years old. So, but I mean, it was an event where people went to, and I think the memories I have of it is rare. I can talk about it for hours about my memories of going there. But what have people told you about their memories since the book came out?
Well, you know, I mean, as I mentioned in the book, my wife Eileen grew up maybe a quarter mile from Roseland, just down 138. And from age 8, she would walk there to go bowling. She saw a lot of concerts there. But whenever I talk to people about Roseland or people talk to me, they smile. They talk about how their parents or grandparents met there. They talk about the bands and the groups that they saw there. And the memories are all positive. People have pictures. And the fact that the venue is still there, used every day as a adult day health center. The stage is there, the bar is there, the dance floor is there, everything's there. The memories when I do presentations people have are wonderful to hear.
Yeah, I think that we all like that era too, though. There's something we don't have now. We're losing that a lot. That we don't have that place where we congregate as a group like that too, and that's what it really was too. I mean, I don't know how many marriages they got out of there, but I'm guessing it was a lot. You know, people went there. It was the hot spot to go to.
I got to say, it was thousands. And in the Depression, the women, their admission was 25 cents, and men were 40. And sometimes women got in free because if there were women there, men were coming. There was no doubt about that.
Yeah. When you're a psychologist and business consultant, so this is your first book, right? And what was that like, the process of writing your first book?
It was great. I enjoyed the whole. I really did.
Yeah.
I loved the research part of it. I loved asking people about Roseland and digging into it. The people at the Old Colony Museum were very helpful. The curator, Bronson, was great. They were all very helpful. Going around and talking to people, going to the library, and it evolved. I got ideas and feedback from a lot of people. The book the way it is now was not what I thought about in 2021 when I started doing the research. I did each year and then a summary of the events in Taunton and the world that were happening, anything that caught my interest in terms of related to my wife's family that's been in Taunton for over 100 years, or my own history. Fei Pan, the owner of Hong Kong City, the present site of Roseland now, suggested that there's a couple of pictures I have in there of people dancing there in 1990 and 1973 to put them side by side with pictures of them at the 100-year party last year in May 2024. And that was a great idea. Yeah. The idea of putting pictures from the party in May of 2024 with Fei Pan and his family, that just kind of evolved. So it was a very interesting process. I got to say, the cover, my granddaughter made the cover.
Oh, that's great. That's great.
She had she had done a media project in her freshman year at Suffolk University on a documentary on Roseland, and that was her cover page, and I liked it so much. I asked her if I could use it, and she said yes.
That's great. So a family affair.
Absolutely.
What was the most difficult part of writing a book, do you think, for the first-time person?
I didn't know anything. I didn't know anything about getting it copyrighted with the Library of Congress, about how to. I hired a book, not editor, book designer. I hired somebody to help me put the images and the text on the page. And that was money well spent because I wrote all the text, I edited everything, but she got the pictures on the page the way and laid it out. A book designer.
It's a beautiful book, and when you open the cover,
Thank you.
It's a very good book too. Are you going to write another book?
Probably. Right now, I got the idea for a short story in my head, total fiction. I've thought about writing a fiction book about the same period, but I'm not Stephen Hunter, and so that's not going to happen.
Yeah.
But this idea about Roseland just kind of grabbed me. Yeah. It came out of nowhere, and took hold, and I just got going. It took me 2.5 years of research to get it going, things fell into place.
Yeah. When I saw the book first at our mutual friend Donna's Serendipity bookstore in Taunton, and I asked her about it. And I asked her about you because I wanted this guy on the show. This is fascinating. I want this guy on my show, and made the connection and stuff because it stands out because it's different. And I don't think we're going to ever see that era again either. I mean, just musician-wise, we're probably never going to see people go out to see that like that. It just really captured it. Some of the names are amazing.
The names are totally amazing, and again, yeah. I know some of the names. Paul Whiteman, for example. Even though I've played many of his songs, yeah. I really didn't have a clue what a big deal this guy was. Yeah. I mean, it was 100 years ago,
right.
But he was huge. Benny Goodman, Tommy Dorsey, Jimmy Dorsey. No Lawrence Welk.
No.
I don't know what
how did Lawrence miss Taunton?
Rose didn't think he was going to draw a big enough crowd.
Really?
Oh yeah, she's quoted as saying that.
Oh.
It's amazing. And I was saying to the manager, Anya, while we were waiting, that during the war years, the Polish bands made up easily 75% of the performers at Roseland. They were polka bands, but they were also big bands, and during that time, they still had the headliners like Cab Calloway and
Duke Ellington.
Duke Ellington, Count Basie,
Yeah.
Jimmy Dorsey, Louis Armstrong. And I try, in the book, there's probably about a dozen or so backstory biographies like Jimmy Dorsey, okay? Most people don't know, but Frank Sinatra was his singer. And Buddy Rich was his drummer. But when they were there, they were his drummer and his singer. And a lot has been made in a lot of Taunton Gazette stories about Frank Sinatra slept here. Well, yeah, okay, but he was like 20, and he wasn't really Frank Sinatra then. So I just like to point that out a little bit. I love Frank.
My mother met him when he was in Boston when he was 20 years old.
Right.
Yeah, it's crazy when you think of that. But you look at him, Glenn Miller, you said, Chubby Checker.
Chubby Checker is the last big name that I found there, and that was in 1988.
Yeah.
I would have thought the 60s.
Yeah.
And maybe he was there in the 60s, but he was the last big performer to be there.
This is like a history of music, though, too. Roseland becomes, Guy Lombardo, and every New Year's you hear Guy Lombardo going out. It's crazy the amount of people that played there.
I tried real hard to get all that in there because I wanted it to be a history of Roseland, but also of the people and the performers that were there, because every generation has their bands. I mean, like the Rolling Stones and the Who and Beatles, stuff like that. My father-in-law and mother-in-law's generation was the swing bands,
right.
In the 30s and 40s, and there was a transition from the 20s. If you listen to music from the 20s, it's really different than music from the 30s. There's much more power in it, and less tubas too.
Yeah, I'm doing a book on the 1940s. I spent a lot of time listening to music from the 1940s just to feel that. And it was interesting how the music, and I grew up in a household with older parents, so they played that music all the time. So those people are not very familiar to me, but I just can't imagine what you paid to go see them too.
They paid nothing.
I know, that was the craziest thing.
I did some of the math a little bit, but now in 1924, Paul Whiteman, to go and see him was $1.75, and the newspaper ad made a big deal that Paul Whiteman set this price, not us, including a war tax. Most admissions at that time were 50 cents, 75 cents. A big deal would be $1. The prices really went down during the Depression, right on through the 30s. At Roseland, 1937 was a huge year. Ella Fitzgerald was there with Chick Webb, Fats Waller was there, Duke Ellington, Duke Ellington. Duke Ellington was the performer that was there the earliest, the most, and the longest. His first appearance there was in 1925.
I saw that. That was crazy that long ago. Was it a case of location, or was it a case of the venue drawing the people?
I think really both. Again, we're just a little ways out of New York, Providence, Boston, but the venue was massive and magnificent. It was a huge stage. They had balconies, and they got the biggest performers there. Now, was that because Rose Kaplan had expertise in bringing them in and then making her world-famous chicken stew? Or did she have some sort of connections that were helping her out? I mean, I don't know. But the biggest names in the country were there consistently.
It also was a venue for boxing as early as 1940.
Again, I correlated to Camp Miles Standish, that when Standish opened up, the boxing started, and it started with local talent from Providence and Taunton, and then going up to and including Marvin Hagler in the 60s. They had, and then wrestling came in after that.
They had some of the biggest names of wrestling too, Killer Kowalski and Haystack Calhoun and Lou Albano, it reads like a wrestling Hall of Fame.
Absolutely. I mean, the biggest names of the pro wrestlers of the time were there.
It was a great place to see wrestling, though. It really was, because you were close.
Very close.
Yeah. You could actually, the wrestlers were accessible. You know, you could shake hands with them when they're going in the ring and things like that too. But it had like so many different lives and so many different venues to it.
It really did. And you know, it was after Rose died in 1990. She was either 90 or 88 or 92, because it's very hard to pin down her birthday. She was an immigrant from Belarus, and took ownership of Roseland at the tender age of 34, more or less, give or take 2 years. In 1934, I mean, a woman owning this venue, that's a huge deal. And she was at the helm until 1990. After she passed, Roseland was shuttered for 5 or 6 years. It was Patrick Mannion, a developer from Boston, a Galway, Ireland native, was the first to renovate it and to reopen it in 1994. His efforts lasted a couple of years. Then it was purchased by another producer out of Boston, Del Pidio, who again sunk a bunch of money into it, like $1 million, and reopened it as a dance hall and venue event, which really didn't go, and it kind of morphed into the Matrix, which was like a hip-hop nightclub, and then the jukebox, or the jukebox and a Matrix, I forget. And it was not popular with the neighbors or the police, because like Roseland in the old days, it was attracting people from the region. So you had a lot of people from out of town coming in, and there was a lot of disturbance, a lot of police intervention, and it was closed in 98 again. Then it stayed like that. There was like about a dozen or so threats of auction until it was finally bought in 2004 by Philip Fay-Pan, and renovated and remodeled and turned into Hong Kong City.
Thank you so much, Keith, for joining us and capturing a special time in Taunton and the region area. I don't think we'll ever see this again, but it was an interesting book. I recommend reading it, especially if you want to know more about what life was like in the 20s, 30s, and 40s. And probably you can have a great conversation with your grandparents about what it was like to go to Roseland, and I appreciate it. Thank you so much for joining us, and good luck with the book. The book's available online and at our friend Serendipity Books too, and I recommend it. Thank you.
Thank you, Mike. Appreciate it.
Thanks. That was